All right, welcome to the Bethany podcast, the second episode that I have been recording. I forget how many we've done total, I think 5. This week we are going to be talking about debt, seminaries and debt, and specifically we're going to be talking to Sharon, Katie, and Shaun. I should give your guys' last names, but Katie, I can't remember your last name.
Katie Heischman.
Katie Heischman, Sharon Flaten, and Shaun, is it Rufener?
Close enough.
Okay, I'm sorry. Who they all three were attendees of the ATS American Theological Seminaries group meeting on debt and seminary. So, just to start off with, do you think can you guys talk about how you paid for seminary, what your relationship with debt and seminary was, just at Bethany itself?
So I came to Bethany with about, I was working on about $20,000 of undergraduate debt and was committed to not adding any more to that, and was really thankful for all of the things that Bethany was really beginning to work on when I was there to help students get through debt-free. And so I started my seminary career living on campus, which was discounted housing at the time when I started, and that was really helpful. I also had to work a job while I was in seminary, upwards of 20 hours, sometimes more, in addition to being full-time. And so that was a lot to juggle, but I also had sometimes my family members might help out with purchasing books or things like that, but a lot of it was working, and thankful for the discounted housing, and then just managing money and just trying to live that brethren value of simplicity. And so, making all of my food from scratch, and just little things like that along the way in terms of trying to get through debt-free.
Shaun, do you have anything you want to talk about your experience with seminary and debt?
Sure. My story is a little bit different, being that I don't have a brethren background. One of the things that brought me to Bethany was because I already had a commitment to be living debt-free. And so as somebody who's in one sense, post-career, I've been involved in multiple career type jobs, looking for different options for school. The scholarships that were available at Bethany were big incentives for me to be able to make it through school, staying debt-free. And so I share the values that Katie just listed as far as living in simple ways. We grow much of the food that we eat. So those types of things are very important, at least in our family, for being able to live frugally. And so Bethany's very magnanimous contributions to somebody who has values for trying to live frugally was a big reinforcement of those things. So that's kind of how I've been able to make it so far. Yeah,
that's great. Sharon, can you talk about your experience a little bit?
Yeah, so my experience is just getting started. I am just launching into my seminary career, so to speak, and my hope is to not accrue any more debt. I'm coming in with less than $5,000 from my undergrad, which is really exciting. And my hope is to continue moving through seminary without adding to that, and hopefully continuing to work on that as I go. And so for me right now, I've been blessed with a congregation who has been willing to help with that month, or with the semester fee that I needed to come up with after getting the various scholarships that the seminary offers, which I'm very, very thankful for that. I did end up needing to take out a small kind of personal loan from my church, just to help with a transition period that I'm going through that has ended up being a little bit longer than I thought it was. But I am still very optimistic and very happy with where I'm at, and am hoping to not have to add to that as I keep going down this path.
Gotcha. Well, thank you everyone for sharing that. You guys covered a lot of specific things that Bethany did to help you. Katie with the discounted housing and the scholarship. And do either Shaun or Sharon, do you have anything else specifically, any specific programs that Bethany had that allowed you to follow this debt-free goal in seminary? Obviously, Sharon, I know you haven't been doing it for very long, any longer than I have, actually. So,
As a connection student, I didn't run into the housing problem. I have my own house already. And so coming into this, I had some money already saved up. So I didn't come into it with already, it seems that having debt from an undergraduate or prior things would really make it more difficult. And so in that sense, I was quite fortunate to not be bringing debt along with me, because that would make it much more of a burden. And I've kept working as well, trying to do things through the summer and just whatever odd jobs I can pick up, allowing me to be a full-time student. So yeah, I guess that's what I would add.
gotcha.
Yeah, for me, I'm a little bit of an odd duck in that I'm looking to travel abroad to do most of my seminary work, to go and study out of the technology center in Jos, Nigeria. And I've really appreciated Bethany's efforts to help see that dream, that calling through by finding extra assistance and working with me through that process. And so my hope is to be there for a year, year and a half, 2 years. Nobody really knows. But then when I come back stateside, I'm very much hoping to utilize the new Pillars and Pathways Scholarship program to then come to campus and be there continuing to follow the no debt track through a hopefully successfully applying for that program. But that will be in a year or two down the road.
I would
Great.
also jump in and add work study. I don't know if I mentioned that before, but work study was something that Bethany offers that I know as a local student you can take advantage of, and I know as a distant student they're also trying to work at having opportunities as well, and that's something that's very, very helpful.
Definitely, it's helpful. It's paying me to do this podcast right now. So, moving on to the specific, the ATS peer group day. What did the form of the day take? Was it small meetings, large meetings? What was the experience like?
It was kind of broken up into a variety of, we had some roundtable discussions. We broke into small groups a couple of times. There was somebody that came in specifically to speak to the whole group from ATS. So they kept it moving in multiple forms. That way it didn't get too loathsome. But yeah, it was nice.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I appreciated the variety of being able to talk with other students. There were students from, I believe, 4 other seminaries there, so it wasn't by any means a big conference, but it was an opportunity for schools or seminaries that might not talk about these things to gather around and actually have the conversations. So there was, of course, us. There was Duke
Divinity.
Yeah, Duke Divinity.
Sioux Falls. Lexington Theological.
Yes.
I think that was all.
Oh, and North Park.
Oh.
North Park. I was like, I think there were 5 of us. And so a wide variety of schools, both in size and what they offer, and just, yeah. And that was very invaluable. And I remember being amazed at how other, especially I think Duke Divinity, like they don't talk about this. You're kind of on your own, and so I've very much appreciated how Bethany makes what's available to us. We know what the opportunities are, and that it's a conversation. It's not just something, oh, you have to go and figure out how to pay for this, but we're here to walk with you and actually have really great programs to offer.
Yeah,
Katie?
Bethany's really taking a leading role with it too, and that's one thing that kind of stood out to me in being in conversation with these other seminaries. And I don't mean to belittle in any way, but it seems like Bethany is really leading the charge and trying to take a preemptive stance on what is happening with seminary students. And I find that very encouraging, and I applaud that with Bethany.
Yeah, that was something that I really resonated with that during that day. Was really thankful for the conversation and the exchanges between different seminaries. But I really felt like Bethany had an extremely good handle on how to help students, manage debt and go through seminary without debt. And they were very proactive on it compared to other seminaries. And so I just felt during that day very proud for all of the intentional work that Bethany has been doing to help students navigate that.
Yeah, proud and just very grateful. As someone who's getting started, I had no idea, because for me, I was interested in exploring this one particular call that Bethany could help with. And so I wasn't necessarily looking to see what other opportunities were out there and what kind of financial packages were available. And so I'm just very, very grateful for the work that President Carter and so many others have been doing to help us get to where we are today, or help me get where I am today with what I'm attempting to do.
And I also feel like it's not just a matter of Bethany helping students through seminary, which they are doing, but it's also helping students kind of set a good pattern of living, or setting a precedent which will hopefully be something that follows them the rest of their life, in the way that they won't incur debt after seminary as well. Just establish good patterns.
Well, that's all great to hear. Can we talk a little bit about specific things that you felt that you learned during the meetings, especially things that the presenters said that you found particularly valuable? Is there anything that stands out to you in that regard?
I guess I would say there's one thing in particular I think that stood out initially, was that the helplessness that students often feel. One, not knowing who to talk to or to speak with about it, and kind of feeling the sense of trapped, and saying they feel like it's a countercultural thing, that they're up against this massive phenomenon that they don't know how to breach or to climb. And so there's this sense of like you mentioned just a few moments ago, in our culture we just don't talk about it that much. And I think that's problematic, and not just problematic for seminary students or other graduate students or undergraduate students, but it's problematic for even children who grow up in a household not knowing how to manage money, because it's just a problem that really snowballs through one's life. And eventually, in seminary, unfortunately, is a place where that snowball often catches up and can bury students. And I mean, studies shouldn't have to have that kind of weight. It's hard enough to be in school without having to bear that as well. So I think I felt a little bit of that resonating with students, saying, it's a lot to carry, and why haven't I heard this before? Why aren't pastors talking about this?
I think for me, one of the things that we touched on multiple times throughout the day was just the concept of, if you don't ask, the answer is already no. And so it's up to you as the person who's interested in exploring more opportunities to ask the questions, like what is out there, and asking that both to your seminary, but also to your congregation, to the people who are supporting you. Because if you don't ask what kind of loans or what kind of funding is available that could help you through an experience like this, then yeah, the answer is automatically no. And so just really trying to empower the student to ask those questions. Because what's the worst that they can say? No. But usually the answer is, oh, well, we have this fund or this endowment or this scholarship available. And I've actually been able to use some of those things within. I actually have two congregations that I consider to be my home congregation. And I've received incredible support from both of them just by asking the questions.
I think I was struck during that day just what a cultural behemoth it is that, that we're all kind of up against in terms of not talking about finances or having a lot of shame around it, or it's just, having educational debt is something that you have. And I think just during that day, just struck by, how just big that is to work against, and how grateful I was that there are seminaries and folks that are trying to tackle that and work at that. And I felt really energized just to hear the different ways that different seminaries were working on that, whether it was having, like, some seminaries had like financial mentors who you had to talk to about your finances and keep track and show, or just that Bethany has classes and is teaching basic skills that we can take with us, that we can teach our families, that we can, have more open conversations that maybe we missed out on for cultural reasons. And so felt like it's such a big challenge, but just felt also energized by how I think culture is changing around that, and how our seminary, of all things, is empowering us to be part of that cultural change. And how will that impact our ministries, whatever setting that might be, our churches, our congregations. And so, yeah, energized by that.
That's great to hear. Is there anything, you guys kind of referenced it a little bit. Are there any specific things that you learned in one-on-one conversations with other students, or was it more of an experience of a kind of gestalt of the larger sense that other schools just aren't paying as much attention to this as Bethany is? Or
in terms of like learning things that Bethany could do more of, I think my answer to that is probably not much, because I felt like Bethany was doing so much more even than some of the schools that were there. And all the schools that were there were committed to the conversation that we were having and trying to educate their students. But I felt like Bethany was doing, not to like toot our own horn, but really just felt like they're doing so much. And they're so proactive about it, and there's so many scholarships that are available and opportunities. So I heard, things that other schools were doing, but I was just felt like Bethany was so proactive and doing so much. Yeah.
well, I think we're moving into kind of wrapping up the recording a little bit. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about? Is there anything you brought away from the meeting? Something that you are ready to do, or some other than? Is it just a sense of excitement about what Bethany is doing and the conversation, or what would you say are the things you brought away from the meeting?
Yeah, I would say that one of the problems, and kind of on the cuff of what I finished with the last question, was that our society is not talking about it that much, and neither are pastors. But one of the reasons that pastors aren't talking about it that much is because oftentimes pastors aren't trained in these things, and they're having a lot of the same issues, and they have financial burdens the same way everyone else does. Just because one is a pastor doesn't mean one knows how to handle finances properly, or has a good handle on frugal living or simplistic living. A lot of these things are across the board problems. And so one of the questions that we entertained was, where do we start to address these problems? And so it really has to begin in everyone's household. I mean, it has to be a personal commitment to say, okay, we live in a debt-riddled society, and our entire economy rotates around this type of thing of having as much as we can, and materialism, and just accumulation of more and the best. And so it's really about adopting practical ways to reduce our own expenses, not spending money on things that we can't logistically afford. Don't live beyond your means, and not caving into the peer pressure that society has of having the newest and the greatest, or that which is always in vogue. And so these are things that take on meaning in a personal life. And so those types of commitments have to be adopted in order to pass them on to the next generation, to where they can say, I'm committed to living this way, because financial freedom and living in a certain way really go hand in hand.
Katie or Sharon, do you have anything else? I can wait if you're still thinking.
Well, now I'm just trying to think of how we could plug something like that into like upbringing and bringing it back into the home. Is it a piece that's now added to like when you're baptized in middle school? There's like a little like financial class like on the side, along with learning how to make communion bread. But yeah, but it is just really interesting how it is just so taboo. I was reading something the other day that said people are much more interested and willing to share with complete strangers about their major surgery and all the ins and outs of this extremely invasive major surgery than their finances, which in that case might not seem so invasive. And so how can it be that we are able to talk about our finances and where we're at and what we can afford without feeling that extra pressure, and how can that just come into the conversation more naturally or more organically, I suppose. And I don't know the answer to that. I do kind of like the idea of it coming into our baptism class. Go out and buy all your communion bread supplies on a budget. And see what that might look like. But
Or
I
like
think
Katie said, make the communion bread.
what's that?
Or Katie's idea, make the communion bread from scratch.
Right. Oh no, that's what I mean. You go out on a budget and buy the 6 pounds of butter that is needed, and then come back and make it. But just that's a great question of how can we bring that into the forefront as a learning tool so that it doesn't have to be this scary, intangible thing.
Just still reflecting on, how much of I think there are cultural shifts happening. When I was in high school, there wasn't an economics class, but now in the county that I grew up in, they have required economics classes that students have to take before they can graduate from high school. And I think, and my dad is one of those teachers for that. And just students are getting, if they're not learning it at home, some public schools are teaching it, and there's a shift to know that, we need to equip people to navigate this system where educational debt or any kind of debt is just the norm. And, I think I think it's great that public schools have these options, but I also think kind of like what Sharon was saying, having it built into your baptismal class, or, at the end of our time that day, Courtney and Jeff Carter were asking us what more could Bethany do, and I was like, I didn't think very much on the seminary level, and so I was like, well, youth financial classes, starting in Sunday school. But I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the responsibility of the seminary, but I think, yeah, in terms of what's next, going out and teaching those around us and thinking about how can we work those conversations into our churches. And I was energized by, I thought it was neat and a big step, accountability. But one school, like I mentioned, had financial mentors who they talked openly with their finances about. And I think, Christian accountability can be really meaningful and impactful, those relationships, and extending that to financial accountability could be really meaningful. So how do we try to model that kind of openness as we go forward? Yeah.
All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining me via Zoom for this, and thank you for sharing your experiences, and it's been a great time, and I have appreciated your insights, especially that apparently Bethany is doing a great job. I'm sure that'll be a very popular message around here to let people know.
Well, thanks for including us.
Yeah.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.